OPB Podcasts.
From the Gert Boyle Studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Thursday, April 2nd. Portland Mayor Keith Wilson entered office last year promising to end unsheltered homelessness in the city. He opened several overnight shelters, and on most nights, those shelters are full. Wilson sees this as evidence that homelessness is decreasing. But the actual evidence, the numbers we have, say there are thousands more people sleeping on the streets each night compared to when Wilson entered the scene. We're going to explain why, once again, officials from the city of Portland and Multnomah County disagree, and why the effort to quantify who is without housing is so fraught. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB politics reporter Lauren Dake.
And I'm OPB Portland City Hall reporter Alex Zielinski.
Alex, let's start, as we often do, by stepping back and just explain this sort of familiar, at this point, disconnect between the city of Portland and Multnomah County.
Right. So since 2016, the city and the county have jointly overseen the region's homeless programs, shelters, transitional housing, outreach, all those different kinds of things. That means that they both pitch in money to keep programs running, and they play an advisory role on how that money is used and what kind of programs it goes towards. And it's never been an easy partnership. There have always been disagreements on where to spend that money, whether it's housing, shelter, kind of this tug of war between that, and who's accountable for what. And the data has also been a central point of tension, deciding how we count people living outside and how to interpret that data.
So when Wilson first entered office, it seemed like he really had a desire to smooth over some of those disagreements and work with the county, and yet a lot of the same issues seem to be resurfacing.
Yeah, he did. You're right. Actually, one of the first things he did after winning the mayor's race, so like a day after the election, was reach out to the current city councilors who were advancing a plan to remove the city from the city-county homeless partnership. And he told them to drop it. Basically, have faith in me as your new mayor to reestablish trust in this partnership, to kind of move the ship forward. And they did. They said, okay, this is a sign of us, trusting you. So yeah, a really strong start. And here we are.
And here we are. And the data has always caused some problems about, trying to quantify who is unhoused has always been tricky. For a long time, we heard a lot of criticisms about the point-in-time count and how that was problematic. Remind us about those criticisms, and then just could you explain how Multnomah County is now gathering the data?
Yeah, so the point-in-time count, which you mentioned, it's this biennial census of sorts where volunteers collect information on where people slept on one single night in January. The federal government requires that all metro areas that receive federal housing funding submit this information every other year, so it's helpful in a way that it's kind of apples to apples across cities, but it's widely perceived as unreliable. Since it's just this snapshot of a moment in time, you could be missing a ton of people who are maybe staying on someone's couch, whatever, or just like out of reach. So it's a big reason why the city and county turned to a new data source in the last couple of years. Now what we have is basically anytime someone interacts with a social service, like uses a shelter, talks with a social worker, moves into supportive housing, information on where they slept that previous night goes into a database. They're asked about it, and it goes into a database that can be referenced, and it reflects where people, when people are living outside and then maybe moving into housing, or vice versa, or people who have newly entered the region and start using services. So you can kind of track the ebbs and flows of where people are going. And it's a lot more reliable seeming than this twice-yearly snapshot.
Sure. Okay. So what does the most recent data tell us?
So currently, the county estimates that nearly 18,000 people are experiencing homelessness in this region, with about 9,000 people considered unsheltered, which means living outside or in a car, not in a shelter. So 9,000. And when Wilson entered office in January 2025, that number was roughly 6,000. There's a bit of a caveat to that data, though, because the way the data is collected has changed, like I said. So it could falsely really inflate these numbers. There are way more entry points to this data system now. It's not just one night, volunteers going out. So it's naturally going to be larger than the point-in-time count information. For example, the number of people experiencing homelessness in 2025 in Multnomah County appears to be 67% higher than 2023. And, talking to data analysts, folks smarter than me, they say a lot of that is because there's just so many more ways of collecting data. That maybe that population was kind of the same size. It's just we didn't know that they were out there. But yeah, at the same time, more people are becoming homeless. Both things can be true.
Okay. At what point did you learn that the mayor felt like the county's data was flawed?
Yeah, I heard rumblings that there were doubts from his staff, but then heard him bring this up himself at a public meeting last month with city and county officials. He started the meeting by urging county data staff to make sure their numbers were solid because it didn't appear to match what he had been seeing on the ground. Let's actually have him say it himself. Here he is speaking at that meeting.
We're messaging that unsheltered homelessness and homelessness is increasing, but we're not seeing it on the street. We're not seeing it with our eyes. And I've been interviewing homeless service providers, and they're seeing their pressure on their system isn't going up. And then I've been working with ERs and going there at midnight and working with ER and ER doctors. And one of them anecdotally said in the last 6 years, his job was hell. In the last 6 months, it's gotten easier. So I want to really drill down and find out the data on that and the reasons why.
So that's his window in on the issue. It's very, as you can tell, kind of anecdotally based.
Yeah, I mean, does he have other evidence besides these anecdotes to say that the county's numbers are inaccurate?
So his office has raised a few more specific concerns that they've heard from shelter providers, that people might be coming into a shelter and giving nicknames or aliases, and so they might be double counted. Maybe they were here one night under Alex and the next night under Snoopy or something. And so that could inflate numbers. Another is that they're hearing that people might be using homeless services despite not actually being homeless. I will say these are all anecdotal bits of information. So we haven't seen any hard data showing that this is a serious issue at all.
Okay. What has the county's response been to the mayor's claims?
So the county's data team argues that if, these concerns that he's raised, if true, if valid, they would still have a very tiny impact on the data. If there's double counting, if there's people using services who aren't technically homeless, it shouldn't be enough to skew the numbers that deeply. And the county also really pushes back on the reliance on anecdotes. Here's Ryan Dybert. He's a deputy director of the county's homelessness department at that same meeting with Mayor Wilson, responding to the mayor.
I understand the anecdotal descriptions that you're providing.
Right.
But these data and these numbers come from people accessing homeless services, day shelters, outreach, homeless shelters, et cetera. So we are seeing that corresponding increase of people accessing services, whether people are seeing that impact on the street or not. So I just wanted to be clear about that.
Right.
So he and others are saying, sure, maybe it looks like there are fewer tents on the sidewalk. Maybe you're hearing from providers that they felt a decrease, but facts are facts.
There is clearly a lot of stake in these numbers for the mayor. I mean, his central campaign promise was that he was going to lower the number of people without housing. And to be fair to him, he has opened a lot of overnight shelters. You spent some time in one of them. The beds were pretty full. But is this just about the mayor being able to say that he has made good on his campaign promise? Like, did he actually believe his anecdotes are the facts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's politics. It's a big piece of it. He's been laser focused on this for 14 months to end unsheltered homelessness. And yeah, you mentioned, and I didn't get to this earlier, but he's opened thousands of shelter beds, or at least over 1,000. And you can see, yeah, sure, I'm opening all these new beds and people are using them. Like, why is that not being reflected on the streets? And he's taken a lot of heat for this being his primary focus. He had to make budget cuts to keep shelters open. He's fought hard. He's sacrificed kind of a lot of political currency almost. And I can imagine that putting all of that work in and seeing the challenge still grow, that's frustrating. He wants to show success. We're now entering another budget shortfall where Wilson is probably going to make some unpopular decisions to keep his shelter running, and he needs a public in his corner. So it's not surprising to me that this is something he's really taking seriously. At the same time, it's really important to put this debate in context. Arguments over data and money within this joint city-county homeless agreement have been going on long before Wilson became a politician. I think he's in a position that many of his predecessors have been in, which is how can the city be good stewards of money, public money, if it feels like it doesn't have all the information on where it's going and what it's doing and who it's helping? And I do think it's natural to question data that shows a huge increase in an issue that appears to be declining. Like, it's human, and I do want to give them some credit for that.
Well, and like you said, the methodology has been changing recently,
Sure.
so I could understand that might be frustrating. I'm wondering how many times he spent in the ER at midnight. That's
I know.
kind of
It's a very
interesting.
specific,
Yeah.
specific mention.
So we talked about this at the beginning, but like this tension between the city and the county, that has existed for some time. I'm just wondering if there's a chance that there will be changes to the partnership so that, voters and citizens of Portland and Multnomah County can expect that these two governments work together in an efficient, effective manner.
Yeah. So the city and county are set to renegotiate their joint agreement again to oversee homeless programs next year. And that's always an opportunity for elected officials to propose some major changes, big overhauls. In the past, even threatened to leave the contract entirely and figure out what that looks like. Wilson told me that he has no intent to end that agreement, and county officials tell me the same. But there is real interest in being more explicit about the roles and responsibilities and financial commitments of each government and how data is shared and collected. Like, I do expect the city will propose having more access to the county's database. So there's a chance that this partnership may be hashed out once again next year. And who's to say what will what will come from it?
Who's to say? Okay, this question is a little unfair because you've just given us a lot of helpful, specific information, and I'm just going to ask you, what is the takeaway here? What are we expected to take away from this? Is homelessness decreasing? Is it growing? Just are we getting better or are we getting worse?
Yeah, I mean, it's very he said, she said at this point. For the sake of avoiding more cranky phone calls, I refuse to be the judge here, but I'll say what I know. We've never had better data to track homelessness in Multnomah County. That doesn't mean it's phenomenal. There's probably flaws, whatever. Data is never perfect, but it appears more reliable than anything we've ever had. Even if there are some duplicates in there or other flaws, it's telling us that we still have a homelessness problem, right? Like, it tells us that people who are previously homeless, then got into housing, they've become homeless again. It tells us people who have never use homeless services in the area are doing so. So regardless of how many people are living without a home in Multnomah County, this issue isn't going away. And it's up to the people holding meeting after meeting after meeting, arguing over numbers to actually address it.
Okay, good answer. Thank you. Let's take a quick break here, and we will be back to talk more government transparency with Alex. And we're back. Okay, Alex, we took a lot of time there talking about data and numbers, and it's sort of a natural segue to another data story that you spent a lot of time with earlier this year and last week, and we've talked about on this podcast, the arts tax. A few months ago, you reported how there was something like $9 million sitting untapped in the office of the Portland City Art Tax coffers. But you recently learned that that's not completely correct. Just can you remind us what this tax is and what you had reported?
Yeah. So arts tax, an annual $35 tax on any Portlander who earns over $1,000 annually. It generates roughly $12 million each year, which goes towards funding arts teachers at public schools and nonprofit arts grants. So late last year, I started hearing concerns from city employees and nonprofit arts leaders about a large amount of arts tax funding, like you said, around $9 million, just sitting there untapped, hadn't been used. At the same time, the amount of money going towards arts nonprofits had been decreasing year after year, and so they really were concerned. They're like, why is this just sitting here? We really need the help. And that's a considerable amount. So I started poking around, and this number I found backed up in budget documents and reports from the Arts Tax Oversight Committee and other public records. At the time, I asked the city to help explain this money. They didn't dispute it, didn't dispute the amount of it or that it was not a reserve. They said it had just accrued due to a lag in spending over the first year of tax collections. So we took that to be the truth and published a story.
And then you heard from the city again.
I did. Roughly a month later, I get an email from the city saying the interpretation of the arts tax funds that I reported on was wrong. They sent this chart showing that the 9 million or so represents just a snapshot in time right after tax collections come in, and it's drawn down to around 2 million actually annually. So there's maybe 2 million, 1.5 million sitting in there, which is not at all how they characterized it to me a month earlier. But I was able to chat with city budget folks and verify that they were right. This is the right interpretation. What I never really got was why they hadn't given me this description before I published a story on it, that, a story that was alarming, that got a lot of folks riled up and pissed at the city. Not even a week later, right? It feels like a significant discrepancy in how they had explained these funds. The only explanation I got was that staff was just really busy at the time and juggling a lot. So anyways, what mattered most to me is that we had a story up that was incorrect. So I wrote an update last week and put a big editor's note at the top of our original story to explain what's what. I should say that none of these changes, none of this changes the public demands to overhaul the arts tax, which has been a thorn in Portlanders' side for a long time. Arts nonprofits, like I said, they believe it's inequitably distributed. Taxpayers think it's just a pain to pay. And everyone questions its oversight model. It's something city council is expected to take up in the coming months still. So even though there isn't this huge pile of money sitting around, just the way it functions and what it does is still in the mix. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Okay, Alex, thank you for your watchdogging and your transparency and all you do and walking us through all this.
You're welcome.
This week's episode of OPB Politics Now was produced by Andrew Thien. Our engineer is Naleen Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, thank you for your support and thank you for listening.